now what's happening in this space, now we start talking about some real concerns and some security things is, well, now this one vendor, and by the way, you could be doing this as a you're a customer, you have this, and you're doing this for your end customers because there's some, part of your business, line of business applications that you're creating. So, you may not see yourself as an ISV or SaaS vendor, but you are because you're kind of doing it in this way. But anyhow, in here, there's one app registration that was created. There's consent across all of the customers. Now, how do they get access to this? Well, one, when there's authentication to the other one. So let's say somebody logs into the app service. We're not talking about background services just yet, but people log into the service. When they go to log in, it gets sent, to that. It's like, hey, you have to log in, hit the login button, goes to the Azure government login. People put in their email address, they put in their password, MFA, token key, whatever. They get validated. So when it comes back, you're going to get a token back that essentially says, here's who this person is and what you need to go do. And now I can take that same token, and if I need to then pass that to the graph, which I've been scoped to go do, to perform the action on their behalf, I'll be allowed to go do that. Where this becomes tricky, where this becomes something to really think about is that, one of the consents that can happen is when we consent for two things: application access, and in that same consent, when we provide the scope screen, the scoping string, we put in offline_access in there. What that does is it's going to say, all right, again, the other party has a consent to it. There's a long chain of events. I'm not going to go through all the details on this, but you're going to get a code and you're going to get a code that you converted to an access token and a refresh token. And because it was approved in the consent for the code the first time, when you exchange and ask it for the access token, by the way, this is a standard that's used in all over in OAuth. If you see all these other places, when offline access is in there, it means that once once it's approved in consent and the application gets it back, it gets an access token. Normally they'll live for about 30 minutes and a refresh token. And what's kind of tricky in there is that there'll be a timeline that'll say, oh, it's normally only good for 30 minutes. Except that refresh token, that original one that you get back, you can actually ask for another token with that same refresh token. The thing that's confusing is you normally would get back another refresh token. You kind of ignore that one. It's the original one that you get to keep asking for things. And this allows you, with that offline access, it means that anything that was in that scope with offline access, I can run on the background without any user having to log in. So it's good if you're going to do background processing, daemon work, things like that. But if that wasn't your intent, do not use that. So again, you can make those calls to say, hey, here's what I need, and the calls on behalf of the users. And then there's also the, hey, I want you to consent for this application, but I want to do stuff in the background. So one, from a management side, be mindful if you accept an application and it says offline access and you go, hold on, what are you doing in the background? You should only be doing things on behalf of the user, but that thing needs to be refreshed. I think typically it's about, I think it's 60 or 90 days that you'd have to actually go research and get another code and then go through that process. So it's something to be mindful of the upkeep for this type of thing. And even there, when you get that refresh token, and even with the client secret, this is something else to think about, because when I access those services, right, on the behalf, I also have to then say, hey, on the background, I'm going to go ahead and talk to, this particular customer over here. It's not just a free thing, you go get it. You still have to provide what was the original URL or on my list and app registration that says it's okay. What's the application access that I'm consuming, and it wants the secret or key. Right, and the key really is the certificate. So you can do certificate or a secret. So what this means is that protecting the secret, because the same client ID, the same secret, I can then ask, like, remember I was talking about the refresh token, but I may want a new one. These two pieces, I can call and ask for it. I do have to tell it the tenant. So when you're doing this multi-tenant kind of environment, when people connect in, there's something called a state key or a state value, so that when I go, when I'm saying, hey, there's a new customer signing up, the state value is like a GUID or 123, and I store in a database. So when it comes back to me, because it's not going to give me a lot of context, it's going to say, hey, we're good, and you got to look at the database. Here's my state key. Oh, this matches, so it's for that tenant, and now I know the tenant. So when I need to go ask for it again, I can. Now, that's some background stuff you got to go do to go track it and keep track of that in whatever stores. But, again, this one app registration, the client ID is the same across all of them, single one. And the secret that I have is used for all of them as well. So again, this one application, whether it's background or direct, has that information. So managing the client ID and secrets, having good rotation, putting it in the vault, keeping track of it is going to be super, super key. And also, that's why you don't want to have too much of a scope that you may not need. So this is something ISV has to do, same as doing the development that you have to go do. I know I don't show Azure Vault on here, but it's what you need to go do. So now let's continue with this particular scenario where, single application, multiple tenants that I'm going through. I'm doing a good job. I put things in Azure Vault. Now the question is, what about the data? So if now you're trying to meet FedRAMP high certification, they have their own laundry list of requirements that you have to have. Now we start to go on the part of, well, if I'm just doing something that's for HR onboarding, again, understanding what's UI data, if say, well, we just look at the SharePoint stuff. So we we use the, we want Teams that, read all because, we need to do some background work and the users that log in, they might have even like an IT admin, could have access to, almost all of the SharePoint sites, but sometimes not all of them because they might have been carved out for some of the CUI data, which is common in a lot of compliance, not just GCC High, but other places as well. So you need another service that can access all of those things. Application access gives you all of that, which is awesome and frightening. So, you have to pay close attention to it. But now that you're accessing those things, now the next question is, if the function of my application is going to work with something that's CUI data or sensitive, should I be managing that for them? I can have a SQL, if I'm using some SQL or blob storage, I could say, yeah, I shred the data so that, and I multi-tenant the data. But there might be times when you actually want to create multiple instances of like Azure SQL or storage to isolate towards the customer and make sure the application can only connect to those databases when the right application instance for the customer is running. So I'm not going to go into that part, but knowing where to store things. So that's really kind of a business decision for you and for the customer to understand where should it be stored. Now, you could have it to where people log in, they're doing it, and they give you a connection point in their Azure tenant for them to store, the Azure SQL or blob storage that you could write into. You could have the same client ID have some access into that, but now we're talking about all kinds of service principals and storing and tokens. But this job ain't easy, and the scenarios are tough, especially when you're talking about compliance, failure, and passing the legal requirements, all those things, data access, data infiltration. So it's not easy, but you're doing CUI data or more, so you have to really take that into consideration. So if you're just doing login, you can say, hey, I just want to do login and nothing else. But again, it's like, well, what is the service that you need? So that's not for me to determine. It's for you all. So again, something there to really kind of be mindful of. So some of this I covered already, but again, in the scoping that you have in the string, when you first do your registration, again, putting offline access, one, as a consumer of this, be mindful, ask questions. The second is, do you need it for that? You could create a separate app registration that's specific for background tasks, and another one that's more specific for people that are doing things. Now, if you're an ISV or application, means you're going to have multiple enterprise applications. That's not bad, and it gives focus of who can do it, what it can do, and you can track it a little bit more granular. So I wouldn't say you'd want to have like 8 or 10 of these things, but it's not uncommon to see more than 2 for one vendor and application. So that one is specific for like batch jobs, background processing, so you can track it. You can that app registration turns to the service principal, so you can also secure what it does in particular places, so it's not so wide open. And still leave the delegate access one for the app registration more for the users that log in and do things under their context as you need to. So again, something to take a look at. On the security side, and this, I'm going to go back to this scenario because there's a couple more things I wanted to go through, and then we'll get to our Q&A. There's, once you're doing this app registration and you're managing things, there are additional capabilities that you can code into your application that essentially fires off the signals to, like, let's say, conditional access. So if somebody is performing an action, regular stuff, and now that person is going to do something that's a kind of more sensitive action, deleting data, maybe it's an approval of something, you can actually say, hey, I'm going to fire off to conditional access that this is a highly sensitive activity. And if your code has that and raises that signal and alert, conditional access can be made aware of it. So that way you can say, hey, this application should be used everywhere, except when it's a high privileged thing that the application is determined and kicks off that signal. When that happens, I want to MFA them again. They've already logged in, but one more time isn't going to hurt them. So you can define that as an administrator if the application has been documented and supported to do that type of thing. So yet another set of controls where you can provide that connection, and then making sure that we do this for all of our customers that we do in GCC Hive, of making sure Azure AD log diagnostics. I think it's called diagnostic settings, but it goes into log analytics because it only stores it for about 31 days, I believe, of activities. You want it a lot longer. One, you need that for the audit, and two, because you're going to want those specifics of what's happening in the application. What do people log in? Where are they logging? Where are they logging in from? And then the application can even extend that and provide more details into log analytics, but that's a whole nother talk. But having this integration does a few things. One, if you have an application that you really want to integrate with Azure AD, there's so many great benefits. I know it feels like I'm talking about all the bummer stuff, but this is the things that's hard. And knowing what are the areas that we have to look at just to have that conversation about it. And the one area that I wanted to make sure that we talked about was, going back to this scenario.